Right. So today's learning session on GitHub Actions, and I'm actually super looking forward and excited to hear that. Just Sajad brought up that we should move towards some kind of a CI, especially for backend team, and I think we can kick it off.
All right. So GitHub Actions. Let me share my screen. I don't really have slides, but I have created an application, a new Ruby on Rails application with latest Ruby and Rails. So I have implemented some CI configurations that I would like to share with you guys, and I think following these footsteps, we can implement that in our system as well. So let's dig through that. First of all, GitHub Actions are basically some actions that got triggered whenever you push some code or to any branch that you specify, or you create a pull request for any specific branch. So these are actions that you can configure based on your likings. So for example, if I go to this new workflow, here you can see you have multiple pre-created workflows for every major framework. For example, we have one for Ruby on Rails, we have one for Ruby, and then we have one for Node.js and stuff like that. So for this particular example, I have created a custom workflow, picking some things from Ruby and some from Ruby on Rails template. So let's move through that. GitHub Actions, and so I have created this particular app, which is, let me just open that app. So this is a short app which basically is a single landing page of Rails app. So it has one model only. If you go to migrations, I have created only one model, which is users with name, age, date of birth, and bio. And I have added a spec for that particular model, which is basically checking all the validations and stuff like that, to demo how we can integrate CI with GitHub Actions. So in this, if you go to this model, we have a validation on name, which is supposed to be present always. Otherwise, this record won't be created. And I have added a validation on age, that it should be greater than 13 and less than 65. So if I go to GitHub Workflows, and for GitHub Actions, we use YAML syntax. So let me briefly go through all the things that are in this particular file. So first of all, we need to set up few triggers, that how you want to trigger this specific workflow. And first of all, I added a name of this workflow, which is CI. And I have set up the triggers to work on main branch whenever you push the code to main branch, and whenever someone creates a pull request against this main branch. You can add multiple branches and add multiple triggers. And there is something workflow dispatch. This will allow a workflow to have a button that you can manually trigger the workflow from. So in GitHub Actions tab now, by adding this specific line, you will have a button that will say run workflow manually. So you can trigger that workflow manually by adding this simple keyword. So if you are not familiar with YAML syntax is just like this simple Python syntax where indentation is very important. Then we need to create some jobs that you want to run. And I added the name for this specific job to be tests. And then we need to set how you want to run it, what platform you want to run it on. So here I specified Ubuntu latest. So this particular file will be specific to Ruby on Rails backend. So keep that in mind. So then depending on the system we have, we need certain services to be executed before we run the code. So for this simple application, all we need is a Postgres. So I have added the Postgres service. This name can be anything, but this is the main thing that I'm using. I'm using this Postgres image. So these images, what are these? Images are basically you can say plugins or actions that different third parties have provided. For example, here a Postgres have a GitHub a plugin for these GitHub actions that will fetch the Docker image of that version of Postgres and pull from that and use that container to run our code. So this instead of creating your own Postgres instance and Docker or container, we use third-party actions or plugins to run inside a container and use those. For example, here I'm using this image and stating that I need to run it on port 5432 and it will forward to the same port. And other than that, there are some configuration that we want to add. For example, in case of Postgres, we want to have Postgres DB name, which is Rails test in my case, and then we want to have Postgres users and password. It can be anything, and you don't want to write something like sensitive over here in this YAML file. What you can do is use a really cool feature from GitHub Secrets. For example, if I go to settings and go to secrets here, for example, I have added a secret. You can add a new repo secret and state your name and value over here and add the secret that will be added under this repo. For example, I have added this secret and you can fetch the secret in your actions so that your credentials are safe with encryption. So if I go back to this one, so I have for the sake of this demo, I have added another service, Redis, that we are heavily using in our system as well. But we don't really need Redis in this simple application. But if we want to configure that, this is how it is done. Same concept, we need to use Redis image with a specific version if we want any version. And then we need to set up some ports, and there are some options that that you can explore from documentation. For example, here I'm using entry point as Redis server. So these are all the services I need for this particular application, for my application to work. Then for this specific job, we have to implement some steps, how things will be done when this action will be triggered. So this line is telling that first of all we need to check out from GitHub this specific main branch, the branch we have mentioned here. So this a particular plugin or action is suggesting that use plugin pre-build checkout v3 from GitHub and get our latest code. So this is fetching our latest code, and then I have another step which is setting up Ruby. The Ubuntu we have created is barebone Ubuntu latest. Now we have to set up Ruby so that we can run our Ruby code. So setting up Ruby is again similar. We have to use some images or plugins from third-party providers. So here I'm using one from Ruby /setup Ruby version 1. And here you can add a lot of stuff, like you can specify Ruby version. But if you have something like this in your file, which already suggests Ruby version. You don't really need to mention Ruby version in the YAML file, but you can specify Ruby version over here as well if you don't have this Ruby version file in the code base. So this will be responsible of setting all the Ruby related stuff in our environment. And with bundler cache true means that whatever we are setting up, we are going to reuse it. We are, for example, this step will run some bundle, will run bundler, and there will be lots of gems that will be installed. And with bundler cache true, we are saying that we don't want to reinstall all the gems all the time. We want to cache them. So our build time decreases. So whenever we push code, this step will check if there are already gems installed in our runner. Then this step will only say that everything is up to date. So after setting Ruby, now it's time to build the project and run some tests. Again, we have a lot of environment variables that our application needs to run test cases or certain modules. So here example, I'm suggesting that I'm saying that Rails environment that we want to run in our application is test, because by default Rails has 3 environments. So we want to run test cases obviously in test environment. And then I am defining my Postgres database URL. So we can utilize that database to run our test and save our data and stuff like that. So sorry about background noises, but bear with me. So this Postgres database URL is combination of username, database name, and password that we set up over here. So this is very simple stuff. That this is database name we want to use in this particular environment. And similar way, we have set up Redis URL that we want to connect to. And this is, I just added this for demonstration how you can fetch some secrets from GitHub Secrets. So this is how you can do that, so that your secrets don't really get published in public repos. Once we are done building the environment, we are going to run some commands. We can run commands by this run keyword. And we, first of all, what I'm doing is I'm installing all the required libraries that we need to have before we run any Ruby code. And this command is responsible of doing that. And then I'm installing a gem called bundler, which I'll be using to run bundle install. And the very next thing I'm doing is bundle install, and I am using 4 parallel jobs to do that, because it can take some time to install all the gems. But if we have all the gems already, it will say everything is up to date and we don't really need to install anything. So retry 4 is suggesting if there is some error, retry 4 times. If it still fails, fail the job. So the next thing I'm doing is, excuse me. So the next thing I'm doing is preparing the database. So if you are running Rails 6 and plus, this will work, DB prepare. If we are like less than 6, we need to use DB setup. So this command is responsible of creating database, migrating database, and adding all the stuff we need into database and running all the migrations. After we have everything set up, the last step we want to do is run all our test cases. Because RSpec and everything have installed, already been installed with bundler install, with bundle install command, or in this setting up Ruby section. So we don't need to worry about installing RSpec or any gem separately. So all we need to do is bundle execute our spec. So similarly, if I run this command in this specific terminal, this will run all my test cases, and it's saying we have six example and all are passings. I'm expecting this to happen on GitHub Actions as well, because I have added some tests and everything should be working fine. So first, let me demonstrate that. If I go to GitHub Actions, and this is the action, and we have this manual button that I was talking about. This won't be present if we don't add this specific line. So let's run this workflow manually. So now this workflow is running, and if I go to details, it will execute all the steps I have told it to. First of all, it is setting up jobs, then initializing all the containers, all the services that I added in the YAML file. Then the next step is fetching all the code from it fetched the latest code, and then it tries to build the project. You can see it's installing all the dependencies. Okay, so we have the job is completed, everything is done. So these are all the things it performed. It fetched the latest code from our repo, and it set up the Ruby, which have multiple things that are done on background, installing bundler, bundle install. These are all the commands that are part of this setup Ruby process. Then this is the next step of our YAML file, which is installing all the gems and running migration, setting up database, then running all the test cases, which is here. We can see 6 dots, which mean every test is passing. So this is how they got triggered. But this example shows how they got triggered manually. Let me just show you guys how we can add some cool stuff on top of this thing. For example, here I have a PR, this one. So what we can do is, let me create another PR, a new branch, just PR. And if I go to README file, and sorry about that, if I go to model user spec and add a failing test, just so that it fails. So let me run this test over here to see if it is really failing. So we have now a failing test. Let me push that. So I have pushed this new branch, and if I now go to, we have this new branch. Now if I create a pull request of this against main branch, as we have configured in our YAML file, this should trigger our GitHub Actions. So here you can see we have some checks to perform, and we can see all the details over here in this tab, how it is performing things. Notice we don't are not able to merge this pull request until this will succeed. So I'll show you how we can set up that as well in a GIF. So let's just first wait for this to complete. Remember, this is a failing case, so we will have some errors. Okay, so we have failed this build and run test. If we go to this particular section and scroll down, we have a failure. It is saying user failing test is failing somehow because you have something wrong in the code. So this is the entire purpose of setting up GitHub Actions, so we are sure that all our pull requests or pushes to main branch are completely safe. It does not break anything in our test cases or in our code. So now I won't be able to merge anything unless I am admin and forcefully merge anything from here. This setting, you can add multiple rules on top of GitHub Actions from setting page. Here you can go to security, I guess. Where is that? Code security branches. Okay, yeah. Here you can add multiple rules. I have added this specific rules require status check, and I can tell it to check if this test job is passing or not. So you can set up all the things like require a pull request before merging, so that nobody can merge with directly into the branch. And there are all the settings that we can explore and configure based on our taste. So for now, I have added only one rule, which is check uh, the pull request. Before merging the pull request, check the status of that action that we just added. So this is how we can implement GitHub Actions in backend, and I think this will really help us um, uh, to maintain the good proportion of tests that are passing, and this will make sure that we aren't really disturbing old specs, or we aren't really um, doing anything wrong with our code. So yeah, that's it from backend side.